Oh, we have more people signing on, but they've probably heard me say all this before. I am Thea Miller-Ryan from Ollie at the University of South Dakota, Sioux Falls campus. I am so glad all of you are here. I know some of you are from South Dakota and some of you are from other places. We welcome you. We ask you to please join an Ollie near you. If you're not in South Dakota, just Google Ollie, O-L-L-I, on your computer with your state's name, and you'll find some great places to continue your lifelong learning opportunities. So I'm really excited today because I was driving to Lincoln, Nebraska. Some of you may have heard me say earlier, and I saw this sign, a big, huge billboard in this small town along the way, and it said, Wahoo, Nebraska, come learn about, I think it says our 5 famous sons. And on that billboard was a horse picture, a drawing of a horse that I recognized because as a child, I read every horse book in the library, loved everything horses. And I said, that is a C.W. Anderson illustration. And sure enough, I made my husband turn and we went to that museum, and it was C.W. Anderson, one of my favorite illustrators, which made me go crazy and buy every book I could find about him, learn about him. And when I started planning for Ollie Shorts for February, I said, you know what, let's call Wahoo and see if we can learn about the 5 famous people, which of course my favorite is C.W. Anderson. I would like to welcome today Aaron Hauser. Aaron, you're the curator there at the Saunders County Historical Society and Museum. Welcome. We are so glad to have you here, and please tell us about your 5 famous sons.
Sure. Let me see if I can get the screen to share.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll work. Okay. It's been a while since I've done a PowerPoint online. Okay.
That's great. It looks good.
Go from the beginning. So everybody sees Wahoo from Nebraska's 5 famous men. Must have been something in the water.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, so the joke is there must have been something in the water because within a very short amount of time, 5 men who were born and raised here went on to national and international prominence. So the picture that you're kind of seeing in the background is Wahoo about 1880. That's sort of what the town looked like when we sort of start our journey. So Wahoo was first settled about around 1865. That's when the first ones started coming in. It wasn't officially incorporated until 1870, and it became the county seat of Saunders County in 1873. Somebody asked before we got started about how Wahoo got its name. That is a really good question because nobody actually knows how Wahoo got its name. There are numerous stories of the name. The one that we kind of sort of promote is that there is a burning bush that was called the Wahoo bush, and it grew in the area about the time that the first settlers were starting to come in. And so that's the one that we kind of have latched onto. There are a couple others that it was a derogatory name. There's one that it was named after a blacksmith or somebody else, but the one about the burning bush is the one that we try to stick with. So in about 10 years, the population had jumped to about 1,000, and by 1900 we were up to over 2,100. And within a generation, so within 20 years, 5 men were born in our town, which so 2,000 people, we got 5 men. That's a pretty good number of people who've gone on to bigger and better things. I know it's really kind of hard to see, but the town behind the image is Wahoo about 1908. So I'm going to go in from oldest to youngest. So our first one is Wahoo Sam Crawford. And he was a ball player, and we have the exact address where he was born, 959 North Orange. There is a house there, but not the house where he was born. He was the 4th of 7 children, and his father was a Civil War veteran that came to Wahoo in about the 1870s, and his parents ran a general store in town. And they weren't a very wealthy family. And so about 7th or 8th grade, the reports are a little contradictory. He left school to help his family. He became a shoe shine boy at a barber shop, and he also apprenticed to be a barber, and all this to help his family with obviously 7 kids. They needed all the help that they could get. But his real passion was baseball. And one of the stories that he recollected later on in life is that they played in an empty lot. And unfortunately, a lot of the balls got hit into this one gentleman's house and broke a window, and he would hold on to the ball until they paid for that window. But even with that, having to pay for a window, he was still into ball. The first team that he played for was a town team, what was called a town team. And Killian Brothers was was the first department store here in Wahoo. And he put together a team, and Sam Crawford is the second from, I don't know how it's on your screen, but in the back row, the second from the left, I guess. I don't know. On my screen, it's the second on the left. And he played there for a couple of years. And then he played for some other teams as well. He played for Superior, and he played in West Point. And apparently he helped West Point win a state championship, and I assume it's just for a town team. I don't know. There's not a lot of information on sort of early sports leagues in Nebraska. He played outfield, and he pitched left-handed. And he kind of did that throughout his entire career. So he moved on up, if you will. He actually started playing for an Ontario, Canada team in early 1899, but his major league debut was for Cincinnati in September of 1899. And actually, Cincinnati is sort of considered the very first professional ball team of all of the major leagues. For his first, when he was playing for Ontario, he made $65 a month, which back then was probably pretty good. For when he was playing for Cincinnati, it was for a doubleheader, and he had 5 hits at 8 times at bat. Now, I'm not a ball player, so I'm not entirely sure how good that was. But if you're a big baseball fan, you probably know the statistics better than I do. So he played at Cincinnati for 3 seasons, and I have up there how many games he played in batting and hits and that whole thing. So about 1903, apparently there was this bidding war in baseball, and he eventually went to Detroit, and that's where most of his major league ball playing was at Detroit, the Detroit Tigers. Again, he played the outfield and pitched left-handed. He played at Detroit. He played in over 2,000 games, and 2 years after he started, he was joined by a fairly well-known player today, Ty Cobb. So if you've heard of Ty Cobb, a lot of people, even if they're not into baseball, have heard of Ty Cobb. They did not get along. They really did not like each other at all, apparently. But they played ball together very well. So, also toward the end of his career with the Tigers, I guess it was like sort of like an exhibition type thing. He played it. We have a couple of pictures of him in like a Chicago uniform and some other teams. I'm not entirely sure how all of that worked. But he finished out his major league career at Detroit. And after that, he ended up in California. He played for a league there for about 4 years. Excuse me. And he also was the first baseball coach for University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And then he was put into the National Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown, New York in 1957. And one of the players that pushed for him to get in that he didn't realize was Ty Cobb. So his former nemesis, if you will, even though they weren't buddies at all, Ty Cobb really fought for Sam Crawford to get into the Hall of Fame. And he was so connected to his hometown, it had Wahoo Sam Crawford on his plaque at Cooperstown. And as far as I know, he's the only player in the National Baseball Hall of Fame to have his town name within his plaque. So, and then he passed away in 1968, and he's buried in California. So our next one is C.W. Anderson for Thea. We don't know as much about him. He's lived more of a quiet life. He was born from Sweden originally, and came to probably the Wahoo in the 1870s. He was a harness maker and sold harnesses. So that may have been his very first, introduction to horses. If his father's making harnesses, obviously have to have horses, so that might have been his first introduction into liking the horses. He graduated from high school in 1909, and right after high school, he did teach at a local school for a few years. But then he sort of moved on. Early work, he did serve in the U.S. Navy for briefly during World War I. And according to his draft card, he lived in Chicago and he was an illustrator. And I found this image online from Life magazine of one of his works. He also attended the Chicago Art Institute for a year. I don't know exactly what all that included. But then he moved to New York after Chicago. And this is really where he starts getting into horses a lot more. In 1934, he was actually a member of the Associated American Artists group. But in 1936, he had built a studio in New Hampshire. And by this time, he was really passionate about horses. In 1936 is when he first published his first Billy and Blaze book. And they were mainly about the proper care of horses, and they also taught a lesson. And eventually there were 11 books in the series, and actually all of the books have been reprinted, so you can get these books online. We have them in our gift shop as well. Billy and Blaze is the first one. Let's see. And so in the 1940s, he spent time in Kentucky, and he painted a well-known painting of Man o' War. I could not find an image that I could use for the Man o' War painting. But he published over 48 books, and 5 of them were translated into Swedish. He also produced several portfolios, and over 1 million copies of his work has been sold. We do have an exhibit of his that has several of his little cartoons. He drew a lot of little cartoons as well. He passed away really, really suddenly while he was in Boston, but he's buried in New Hampshire. And he's considered the foremost American author and illustrator of horse stories. And this is actually the exhibit that we have. He was married. His wife was also a writer, an author, and a poet. And we do have a copy of a book of her poetry as well. But he had no children. He did have a stepson through his marriage. So Howard Hanson is our middle child. He's a composer. He was born in 1896. The house that you see was where he was born, and that is actually part of our museum. It's not on our campus, but it is within Wahoo. He would be considered a child prodigy today. He started playing piano at age 6. His mother was very interested in teaching him the piano. We had a local college here, Luther College, associated with the Lutheran Church. So he did graduate from the School of Music from Luther when he was about, I think, 12 or 13. And then he graduated from Wahoo High School in 1913. And then, as you can see, he attended the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He just received a diploma of what today we would call Juilliard. And then he was a graduate of the Northwestern University in Chicago. And by age 20, right after he graduated from Northwestern, he was offered a professor position at the College of the Pacific in California. And then 2 years later, he became the dean of the conservatory there. Excuse me. And then he was the first fellow of the American Prix de Rome competition in Rome. He was there for about 3 years. Eastman School of Music. This is really where he is most prominently known. He became the director of Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, at age 28, and that school will become one of the leading and most progressive schools in the country. He also helped establish the Eastman Rochester Orchestra, which today is the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. We spent over 40 years there. He's won several awards and accolades. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his Symphony No. 4, which was dedicated in memory of his father. He was awarded a Peabody Award. He had over 30 honorary doctorates and degrees. His opera is Marymount is considered the first American opera. He created over 56 pieces of work. He considers his work, which is called Serenade, is most successful because he claims that it got his wife to marry him. And he's kind of considered one of the fathers of American classical music. He became the director of the Institute of American Music, which would later be named in his honor. It's been stated that almost every composer since World War I is indebted to him in some way because he's just considered so influential for his technique and what he produced. And he died in New York. This is a picture of the piano that he learned how to play music on. It is in the house, in the Hanson house, and we are in the process of restoring it. So. Now, of all of our famous men, most of you have probably seen a Zanuck movie. If you've ever seen any movie produced by 20th Century Fox that has a direct connection to Darryl Zanuck. So he was born in 1902 at a hotel that his parents managed that his grandfather owned. The hotel has since been demolished. It's now a beer garden, which I think he would actually probably get a kick out of. Age 15, he lied about his age and served in the army during World War I. So his parents got divorced and then they moved to California, and his actually passion was to be a writer or a screenwriter. So he started working at Warner Brothers. So he worked for Charlie Chaplin and Rin Tin Tin movies. He also wrote a book called The Habits. I have not read it, but we have a copy of it. He was also, a lot of people remember the original Jazz Singer film. He was involved in that. He was also sort of innovative later on in terms of some of the techniques and some of the storylines that they worked on. And there's a misprint, sorry. Too many of the gangster films. He's sort of credited with, those James Cagney gangster films from that time period. He was sort of the idea man behind those. And in 1933, he co-founded 20th Century Fox. He apparently within the first 3 years, I guess there were a lot of independent film studios at that time, and within 3 years of the co-founding of the studio, it was one of the most successful at that time. Some of you probably have seen the Shirley Temple movie. He was responsible for some of the Shirley Temple movies that were produced. He was also very innovative in terms of he wasn't afraid of tackling really what today would be touchy subjects. So he was willing to make movies that dealt with racism, anti-Semitism, mental illness, that sort of thing. He did not shy away from that. He helped develop what today is called widescreen, and some other movie making techniques. When he resigned from 20th Century Fox, and that could be a whole program in and of itself, he formed DFZ Productions and made his own movies. One of the best known one was The Longest Day. He was, however, sort of brought back into the fold of 20th Century Fox, and mostly to save the production of Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, which was apparently a total disaster before he got involved in that. So he was elected president emeritus. He won at least 3 Oscars and 3 Thalbergs, and today actually people can only get one Thalberg, mostly because of him. Produced well over 200 movies. Like I say, you have probably seen a Daryl Zanuck movie. His son was also really involved in theater in the movies. He was a producer as well. He produced Jaws, Road to Perdition, several other things. So he stayed in the family. And then he died in 1979. And there are several biographies if you're interested in Zanuck. He had a very colorful life. And our last one, George Beadle, who was a scientist. He was born in 1903 on a farm about a mile south of Wahoo. His father was very well known. He was a very unique individual. That's how I've seen it described. Very interested in farming, and that's probably where George got his passion for farming and his later work in studying various crops and that sort of thing. So he graduated in 1922. He wasn't going to go on to college, but one of his teachers really encouraged him to go. So yeah, so Bess McDonald sort of, prodded him. George's mother passed away when he was very young, and his grandmother sort of stepped in, but once she had to go, she had her own life, so she had to, leave them. And so it was lots of housekeepers, but this Bess McDonald was the one who sort of really stepped in and sort of encouraged George's love of education and science and that sort of thing. So he went into studying various things, received his PhD from Cornell, ended up being a professor of genetics at Harvard, and was actually ended up being the chairman of biology at Caltech. And this is a book that was written about him. So the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1958 was divided between three men. So George Beadle and Edward Tatum got half of it, and then another one went to a Joseph Ledberger for their work in genetics. And I guess this is groundbreaking work that they're still basing a lot of the work today on. And then in 1999, the Genetic Society of America established the George Beadle Award, given to individuals who have outstanding contributions to genetics. So he was also a professor at Harvard. He was professor of biology at Stanford, was the chairman at Caltech. In 1961, he became the president of Chicago University. He retired in 1968. He was also the director of the American Medical Institute for Biochemical Research, but there was a whole laundry list of other things that he was involved in, including a horticultural society, American Association for Advancement of Sciences, just a variety of different science-based organizations. He held over 20 degrees. As I said, president of the American Association for Advancement of Science. The Beadle Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln houses the Department of Biochemistry. There's also a middle school in Omaha that's named after him. And he actually died in 1989 with complications due to Alzheimer's. So those are our 5 famous men. There are a few others from the county that have made an impact, but those have sort of really, gone beyond Wahoo and just made a mark in their respective careers, and and has continued to make an impact today. I mean, I have people who come into the museum, quite often asking about one or a couple of them because they are interested in whatever field that happened to be that person happened to be involved in. We've had people who are working on that are related to music that come up and want to see the Hanson house. I've had people who we don't get so many Xanic people, but at least they want to know, about his life when he was here, even though he was here for only a short time. So, are there any questions? I know I had to zip through that, but those are the 5 famous men of Wahoo.
That was really interesting. Thank you. Wow. And what is the population of Wahoo now?
We're at about 4,500. We might be 46 now, but we're about 4,500.
That's incredible. Does anybody have any questions for Aaron? All right, I had one about Zanuck.
Okay.
You said his leaving, I think you said Warner Brothers was a story in itself. Did it have anything to do with McCarthyism?
No, when he left it wasn't Warner Brothers. It was 20th Century Fox.
Okay.
It wasn't, I don't think it was due to that. It was more dealing with, I think the studio kind of wanted to go in one direction and he didn't really want to go in that direction. And I think one of the books, it talks about him being one of the last of the movie moguls. So while he was very innovative in a lot of ways, he wanted this iron control of the studio, and a lot of people could see that that's not the way it was going to be going. There were people under him that were like, no, we can kind of see the future and you're kind of stuck in the past. So there was a big to do, and there's a lot more on that one. So yeah, I think there's a sort of the history of 20th Century Fox, and so he kind of felt his son was also trying to push him out as well. So he just typed, I'm done, I'm going. So.
We have a question in chat. A couple questions. One, is it any of the 5 your favorite?
I can't play favorites. No, I don't. Actually, I really don't have a favorite. I think they're all so unique that they all have, there's a little something about all of them that I could pull from. I mentioned I'm not into ball, but the fact that Sam Crawford's record for triples still stands to me is very impressive.
That is.
And the fact that Howard Hanson can play the piano, I can't play any musical instruments, and a lot of people, obviously I like watching movies, I'm not really into science, but the fact that he could look at something and sort of take it apart and figure out how it works, fascinates me. And I'm not into horses like Anderson, but I don't mind. I like to draw. So it's just elements of all of them I can appreciate.
Are there any descendants of those men living in Wahoo?
There are some cousins of Howard's. That's about it. Most of the family sort of dispersed. We have several of the relatives are buried here in some of our cemeteries. In fact, George Beadle's son is buried here with his grandparents. But most everybody kind of dispersed, and yeah, so no, like I said, there are some like second or third cousins of Howard Hanson's, and that's about it that I am aware of. With like C.W. Anderson, it's really hard to know because Anderson is such a common name around here that I don't know who might be related to him. So
I did find a biography of him on, it must have been eBay.
Okay.
That was written by his stepson, and it's a lot of just typewritten pages that are bound together, but it's interesting about his life and how he came to be such a great illustrator. Just for the record, if anyone has any original C.W. Anderson paintings, I'd love to talk to you. Let's see. Anne says, Thea said she found books about the illustrator. Oh, at your museum. Do you have things about the other 4? So do you have books about and by the other 4 in your gift shop?
Not in our gift shop. Oh, well, I take that back. We have, there is a book on Sam Crawford, that we do have that. However, the book on beetle we do not have. He's just not quite as well known. And some of them I can't get wholesale, or retail. I can't get that, so it's hard to resell that type of thing. And as for the Xanic ones, they're kind of, I don't think they've been reprinted, so I would have to hunt for them to see if they'd be reprinted.
Okay,
But the
well,
beetle, yeah. So,
I need to respect everybody's time here. I told us all we'd get us out of here by 1 o'clock. Erin, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. And everyone, please stop in Wahoo, Nebraska as you're driving through. Their little museum is so worth it. It's a beautiful little place and really neat to see an Oscar there.
yes.
So thank you everyone for coming. And Erin, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Right.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Thea.
Hi, Dad.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.